The stone is cold. Not the clean chill of a stream-smoothed pebble, but the invasive, damp cold that seeps up from unimaginable depths, leaching into bone. Little Eleanor crouches, a fragile bird perched on the carved aperture, her thin, woolen kirtle hitched high. Below her, darkness breathes. Miasma rises, thick, cloying, the accumulated exhalation of centuries. Rot, waste, despair, festering in the unseen chute beneath the castle's skin. It is the stench of the world's end, bottled here in this stone cell. The wind doesn't whistle, it moans, forced upwards through that terrible stone throat, carrying whispers from the underworld. Chilling the sweat on her neck despite the reek, her small fingers, white-knuckled on the frigid seat, trace the scars, etched into the wood. Time has smoothed them, but the desperation remains. A crude ship tossed on invisible waves, a leering demon with cold black eyes. The stark declaration, Matilda Feasted. Matilda made this. Who was Matilda? Did she crouch here too, centuries ago, tracing the same chill, breathing the same despair? Did the stone throat swallow her screams as well? Eleanor shivers, a tremor that starts deep within and rattles her teeth, not just from cold. The abyss yawns beneath her, a single, treacherous slip away. To fall, to be swallowed by that darkness, tumbling down into the choked, writhing heart of the castle's decay. The image claws at her belly, colder than the stone. A sliver of vision through the carved seat offers a cruel counterpoint. The outer bailey, bathed in the bruised light of failing day. A traveling player, motley, faded to dull earth tones, tumbles wearily on the packed dirt, his bells a hollow jangle. A gaunt hound watches, unimpressed. A page, no older than Eleanor, darts a stolen goose squawking in panic under his arm. A nun, her wimple stark white against the gathering gloom, scolds with hands like fluttering birds, her voice a distant buzz swallowed by the wind. Life, ordinary, struggling life, playing out just beyond reach, framed by the grotesque aperture of the garderobe. It feels like watching a tapestry from inside the loom's grim skeleton, from somewhere deep within the warren of stone, muffled, distorted by corridors and thick walls, yet piercingly clear to Eleanor's strained ears, comes the scream, raw, primal, ending not in a sob, but in a guttural gasp that hangs in the thick air. Her mother. Again, the sound is a rusty nail driven into Eleanor's chest. It echoes the unseen agony below, the rat's unseen scrabble in the filth. Birth and death, the castle's eternal rhythm, played out in blood and darkness. She flinches, pulling her knees tighter, shrinking into herself, trying to vanish into the cold stone. The world contracts to this reeking perch, the distant scream, the gnawing void beneath her dot. Her small hand, trembling, dips into the hidden pockets sewn into her kirtle. Her fingers close around a precious, crumbling prize, a stolen fragment of honey cake, snatched from the distracted kitchen maids. The scent of it, faint but achingly sweet, clings to her skin. For a heartbeat, she hesitates, torn between hunger and a strange, burgeoning impulse. Then, with a flicker of defiance against the encompassing grimness, she lets a single, tiny crumb fall. It vanishes instantly into the blackness. Silence. Then, a frantic, wet scrabbling. A flash of matted fur, a pink tail, eyes like tiny hellcoals, catching the last gray light filtering through the seat. The rat seizes the offering, vanishing as quickly as it appeared. A transaction in the dark, a momentary spark of life, fierce and desperate, mirroring her own. The wind shifts, a subtle, impossible alchemy is cutting through the reek, riding the same cold current that moments before carried only despair. Comes a new scent, warmth, east, the golden, heart-stopping fragrance of bread baking in distant ovens. It is a scent from another world, a promise whispered on the foul air. Eleanor freezes. Her eyes snap shut. She breathes in, deep, deeper than the stench allows, chasing that fragile thread of warmth. Suddenly, she is encroaching on cold stone over an abyss. She is floating, rising. The crushing weight of the castle walls dissolves. Below her, impossibly green, rolled sun-drenched fields dotted with sheep-like clouds. The wind here is clean, smelling of clover and damp earth, carrying the distant lowing of contented cattle. She can feel the imagined sun, a gentle pressure on her closed eyelids, a warmth spreading through her chilled limbs. Freedom, a vast, silent expanse where screams are swallowed by distance, not stone. For one breath, too, she is untethered, weightless, bathed in impossible light. The illusion shatters, not with a sound, but with sensation. The unyielding, icy bite of the stone seat against her bare thighs. Reality crashes back, colder, heavier, fouler than before. The sanctuary of the fields evaporates like smoke. The scream echoes again in memory, sharper now. The wind moans its old, familiar dirge. The stench reclaims its dominion. The floating girl is gone. Only Eleanor remains, shivering on the stone throat. The taste of honey cake ash in her mouth. The phantom warmth, a cruel ghost on her skin. Slowly, deliberately, as if assembling armor, she stands. Her small fingers smooth the rough wool of her kirtle, pulling it down with a dignity that seems absurd in this place. She arranges the folds, a tiny ritual of order against the encroaching chaos, as she turns towards the narrow, dark stair leading back into the castle's heart. A final punctuation mark slams down on the dying day. From far below, near the gatehouse, the sound rends the twilight air, a brutal, grinding shriek of tortured iron, a final, resonant crash. The portcullis, lowered, sealed. The sound echoes through the stone corridors like a tomb door, settling into place. The castle draws its final breath of the outside world and holds it. Within its walls, the air thickens, becoming stagnant, heavy with the smell of damp wool, cold ashes, and the unseen, unceasing labor within the birthing chamber. The great stone beast settles for the night, locking its secrets, its suffering, its tiny, shivering inhabitants inside its belly. Eleanor pauses at the top step, a small, dark silhouette against the deeper dark of the descending stairwell. The scent of baking bread is gone, utterly devoured by the stone and the night. Only the lingering reek of the garderobe and the phantom echo of the iron crash remain. She takes a breath, not deep this time, shallow and bracing. The scream will come again, or another sound entirely. The castle holds its breath, does she? Then, one small foot finds the first cold step down, descending into the deeper dark, where the only warmth is the uncertain flicker of a guttering rushlight and the relentless, consuming struggle for life itself. The silence after the iron crash is profound, broken only by the wind's mournful song through the arrow slits and the first, tentative cries of a newborn, fragile as spun glass, piercing the heavy air of the sealed tomb. The fragile cry still hangs in the stone-thick air, a wisp of new life trembling against the oppressive silence of the sealed castle. It is a sound both achingly pure and profoundly unsettling, a single candle flame guttering in a vast, lightless crypt. Eleanor pauses on the narrow stairwell, the cold stone wall rough against her palm. The scream is done. Now, only this tiny, persistent wail threads through the corridors, echoing. The unseen infants struggle to breathe in a world already defined by cold stone and whispered fears. She listens, not to the cry itself, but to the castle's response. A deeper, older silence settling back in, absorbing the sound like moss absorbs rain. The portcullises' final crash still vibrates in the marrow of the place, a reminder of walls grown thicker, barriers irrevocably drawn. Descending is like sinking into a well. The stairwell, barely wider than her shoulders, twists down into utter darkness. Her fingers trail the damp, uneven stone, every niche and protrusion a familiar landmark in the blind. The air changes, layer by layer, the lingering, medicinal reek of the birthing chamber, one floor up, a cloying blend of herbs, blood, and exhaustion. Then the damp wool and sweat fog of the garrison hall, a low murmur of masculine voices, and the scrape of a wet stone on steel seeping through a heavy oak door. Lower still, the subterranean chill of the undercroft, smelling of earth, stored, grain, and the faint, metallic temps of the well. Here, the only light is the guttering flame of a solitary rushlight jammed into an iron sconce, casting monstrous, leaping shadows that twist and writhe on the vaulted ceiling. It illuminates stacked barrels, sacks slumped like sleeping giants. In the yawning mouth of the well itself, another stone throat drinking deep into the earth. A red, perhaps the same one, larger in the uncertain light, scuttles along the base of a wall, vanishing into a crack. Eleanor doesn't flinch. Creatures of the dark recognize each other. She moves with the silent certainty of one who knows every treacherous step, every creaking board. This is her domain after curfew, the hidden pathways known only to the smallest and most forgotten. A narrow servant's passage, little more than a gap between thick walls, swallows her whole. The air here is thick with dust and the ghost of wood smoke. She presses her ear to the cold timber of a hidden door. Beyond the great hall, the rumble of the Lord's voice is a distant storm, punctuated by the higher, sharper tones of his visiting brother. Words are muffled, indistinct, but the cadence speaks of tension, of matters grave and urgent. ... Cannot hold if the Duke moves south. ... Harvest was blighted. ... Loyalty bought with empty coffers. Eleanor pulls back. Grown men's troubles are heavy stones. She has no strength to lift. Her destination isn't the hall. The scent, the warmth, light, grows stronger now. A golden thread woven through the castle's cold tapestry of stone and shadow. It leads her down, deeper into the belly, towards the kitchens. Not the main entrance, bustling by day, but a low, arched opening near the bakehouse ovens. Heat radiates from the stones here, a welcome pressure against her chilled skin. She crouches in the deeper shadows just outside the archway, peering in. The bakehouse is a realm of elemental forces, a stark contrast to the chill silence elsewhere. The great ovens glow like the entrances to miniature hells, their iron doors, radiating waves of heat that distort the air. Embers pulse within, breathing light onto the soot-blackened faces of the baker and his young apprentice. Sweat glistens on their brows, tracing clean tracks through the flour dust that powders their skin and clothes like ghostly snow. They move with a wary, practiced rhythm, hauling heavy peels, sliding unbaked loaves onto the scorching hearths, retrieving other swollen golden brown, their crests crackling like distant thunder as they cool. The air hums. It's the deep thrum of the fire, the hiss of escaping steam from the dough, the rhythmic scrape of the long-handled peel against stone, and the smell, oh, the smell. It's more than bread, it's life itself, concentrated, yeasty, sweet, and profoundly comforting. It's the scent of dawn, of survival, baked into existence within this fortress of night. The baker, a thick-set man with forearms corded like oak roots, pauses, wiping his brow with a floury forearm, spots a small, slightly burnt loaf that tumbled awkwardly from the peel, a reject. Without a glance towards the shadows, he tosses it carelessly towards the archway. It lands with a soft thud in the cooler darkness, just beyond the pool of fierce light. A small benediction, a communion offered to the unseen spirits of the castle's depths. Eleanor waits, breath held, until the men turn back to their fiery work. Then, swift as the rat, she darts forward, snatches the warm, misshapen loaf, and melts back into the passage. The heat of it seeps through her girdle. A tiny sun clutched against her ribs. Close, whispers in the dark. A shadow falls, retreating back up the winding servant stairs. The loaf's warmth is a beacon against the encroaching chill. She pauses on a tiny landing, a forgotten space where a narrow arrow slit offers a sliver of the world outside. The moon, a cold, bone-white sliver, casts its feeble light onto the silent outer bailey below. The traveling player's card is a dark hulk against the wall. The stolen goose is silent. The nun is gone. The world beyond the walls is a tapestry of black and silver, utterly still. It feels impossibly distant, a dream painted on glass. She tears a piece from the loaf. Crust shatters. The steam escaping carries the pure, simple promise of sustenance. She eats small, deliberate bites, letting the warmth spread from her belly outward. For a moment, the gnawing emptiness recedes. The stone feels less cold, the shadows less deep. She leans her forehead against the cool stone beside the arrow slit, breathing the clean, frost-touched air sneaking through. Low, faint, but distinct, comes the rhythmic crunch of boots on gravel. The watch, some atoms, their halberds, catching the moonlight like slivers of ice, make their slow circuit along the inner curtain wall. Their voices, low and bored, drift up, double quotes, heard the babe, cried weak, like the last one. I, the Countess, hard times cling to her like that. Damned scent of feverfew, whispers, though, down in the village. Saw that rider come in hard before the gate dropped from the north road. It's trouble brewing, always is, like the smell before the storm. Storm's coming, all right. The steward's voice, tight as a bowstring at vespers. Something's got the hounds restless in the kennels, too. Sensitive beasts. Their voices fade as they round the tower. Eleanor remains frozen, the half-eaten crust forgotten in her hand. The warmth leaching from the bread is suddenly insignificant. The tiny cry was weak. The rider from the north, the steward's tension, restless hounds. Its words hang in the cold air like unsheathed blades. As the fragile piece of a warm bread evaporates, replaced by a colder, more familiar dread. The castle, sealed tight, doesn't feel like a refuge anymore. It feels like a cage holding its breath, waiting for the storm the men spoke of, the trouble brewing beyond the walls. The moonlight through the arrow slit seems colder, now illuminating not freedom, but the intricate bars of their stone prison. Below, in the utter stillness, a dog howls, a long, mournful sound that shivers up through the stones and coils around her heart like ice. The night holds more than silence now. It holds a warning. The mournful howl still vibrates in the marrow of the stones, a sound so deep it seems to rise from the earth itself, not the kennels. It coils around Eleanor's heart like frozen wire. It's the half-eaten crust of bread, moments ago a small sun of comfort against her ribs, now feels like cold lead in her fist. The watchman's low words, weak babe rider from the north. Storm's coming, echoes louder than the fading howl, bouncing off the narrow confines of the stairwell. The moonlight through the arrow slit no longer paints silver freedom. On the bailey, it etches the cold, hard lines of their cage. So, isn't sleeping, it's waiting, it's holding its breath, thick with the scent of damp wool, wood smoke, and the metallic temps of fear. Eleanor shivers, not just from the pervasive chill, but from the sudden, absolute certainty that the fragile walls around her are paper-thin against the darkness. Gathering beyond, descending further, is like sinking into the castle's clench. Fist, the air grows colder, damper, carrying the subterranean smell of wet earth and old mortar. The The comforting hum of the bakehouse is swallowed by profound silence, broken only by the scuttle of unseen things in the walls and the rhythmic drip, drip, drip of condensation falling into unseen pools. She avoids the main corridors where torchlight flickers erratically, casting long, dancing shadows that might conceal listening ears or watchful eyes. Instead, she slips through a forgotten gap behind a tapestry heavy with dust and moth holes. The faded scene of a hunt, hounds frozen mid-leap, oblivious. This passage is narrower, colder, the stones slick with moisture, leads to a place few willingly go at night, the Undercroft Chapel, its vaulted chamber hollowed out near the foundations. Here, the air is thick with incense gone stale, and the lingering scent of cold candle wax. Single oil lamp burns before a small, weathered statue of the Virgin, its flame a trembling, lonely eye in the gloom. The feeble light barely reaches the corners where darkness pools like spilled ink, and there, kneeling on the cold stone floor, head bowed, is Agnes, the midwife. Her broad back, usually so solid, so capable, now seems hunched under an invisible weight. Her hands, red and chapped from constant washing, are clasped so tightly the knuckles are white bone. Eleanor freezes in the shadowed entrance. She knows better than to interrupt. Agnes's prayers are not gentle murmurs. They are low, guttural things, torn from deep within, a desperate bargaining with forces unseen. ... Spare this one, Ole. Mother, intercede. Strength for the mother, breath for the child. Shield them from the shadow that walks. The word shadow hangs in the air, colder than the stone. It feels less like a prayer and more like a ward against something palpable. Something Agnes has seen flicker at the edge of life and death in the birthing chamber. Eleanor's own breath catches the shadow. Is it death or something else the watchman feared? Suddenly, Agnes stiffens, not at Eleanor's presence, but at a sound echoing faintly down the stairwell from the floors above. A heavy, hurried tread, the jingle of mail. Boots on stone, moving with purpose towards the Lord's chambers. Agnes's head snaps up. Her face, illuminated by the trembling lamp, is etched with exhaustion, but her eyes are sharp, alert, reflecting the flame. Like dark pools, she listens, her entire body taut. The footsteps pause, then a low murmur of voices, the Lord's, weary but sharp, and another, unfamiliar, strained and urgent. Too far to hear words, but the tone is unmistakable. Crisis. Agnes pushes herself up with a grunt, the weariness momentarily replaced by grim resolve. She spares one last, desperate glance at the Virgin, touches a calloused finger to her lips, then blows out the lamp. Darkness crashes down, absolute and suffocating. Eleanor presses herself flat against the damp wall as Agnes brushes past, a shadow among shadows, moving swiftly towards the sound of trouble. Her scent of herbs and lye soap briefly cutting through the chapel's stale air. Left alone in the sudden, crushing dark, Eleanor feels the enormity of the castle press in. The weak infant, the anguished countess, Agnes's fearful prayer. The urgent footsteps, they are all threads tightening around the castle's heart, pulling it towards what? The shadow. The silence in the extinguished chapel is deeper now, profound. The drip, drip, drip sounds like a failing heartbeat. Eleanor needs light, needs to see. She feels her way along the wall, fingers tracing the rough-hewn stone. Moving away from the chapel's oppressive darkness, upwards now, towards the source of the commotion. Not towards the Lord's solar itself, that would be madness, but towards the tiny, disused scriptorium tucked high in the south tower. It's her secret place, her spy hole. The climb is steep, the wooden steps groaning treacherously under her slight weight. She moves with agonizing slowness, every creak a potential alarm. The air grows marginally less damp, smelling faintly of old parchment and dust. Finally, she reaches the narrow door, warped and stiff in its frame. She eases it open just a crack, wincing at the faint scrape. The scriptorium is a sliver of a room, dominated by a high, narrow window overlooking the inner ward. Moonlight streams in, painting a cold, blue-white rectangle on the dusty floor. But Eleanor doesn't look at the moon. She presses her eye to a gap in the crumbling mortar where the wall meets the timber frame, a flaw in the castle's skin, giving a fractured view into the Lord's private anteroom next door. A fire burns low in the hearth, casting restless, leaping light. Her father, the Lord, stands near it, his face gaunt in the firelight, etched with lines deeper than she remembers. He wears a heavy, fur-trimmed robe, but looks as if he feels no warmth. Opposite him, still clad in a mud-spattered riding cloak, stands the stranger. His face is drawn with exhaustion and something else, fear, or perhaps the residue of hard riding through dangerous dark. The steward hovers nearby, parchment in hand, his usual composure replaced by a pinched anxiety. The atmosphere crackles, with tension thicker than smoke. Double quotes, ... confirmed. My lord, the rider is saying, his voice rough. The duke's banners are raised. He gathers his knights at Blackwood Cross. They say he calls it justice for the insult. The Lord makes a sharp, dismissive gesture, a flicker of anger in his tired eyes. Justice, it's greed, cloaked in righteous fury. He covets the river tolls, always has, turns to the steward. Our stores, the granary report. The steward unrolls the parchment, his voice thin. Enough for the household, perhaps 8 weeks, less if we must provision the men-at-arms fully. The village stores are depleted. The blight hit harder than we feared, sire. Right. The Lord closes his eyes for a moment, a muscle jumping in his jaw. 8 weeks. The words hang in the firelit air like a death knell. The rider shifts. There's more, my lord. Scouts report movement on the northern passes. Not just the Duke's men, others, raiders, like carrion crows scenting weakness. He hesitates. They carry the wolf's head banner, a collective intake of breath, sharp as a blade drawn. Even through the crack in the wall, Eleanor feels the icy wave of dread that washes over the room. The wolf's head, mercenaries, ruthless, undisciplined, drawn only by plunder and blood. Worse than a rival lord. The Lord's face hardens into stone. The storm breaks on 2 fronts, greed from the south, savagery from the north. He stares into the dying fire. Seal the inner keep gate at first light. Double the watch on the walls. Every man, every boy old enough to hold a pike, mustered by dawn. Conscript from the village. Empty the armory. His voice is low, flat, devoid of hope, only grim necessity. We prepare for siege. The word siege lands like a stone in Eleanor's stomach. It's not just a word, it's a future, a drawing in, a shrinking of the world to these cold, encircling walls. Hunger, fear, the end of sunlight on grass. The rider bows, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten beneath the weight of the command. The steward scurries out, parchment clutched like a lifeline. The Lord remains alone by the failing fire, a solitary figure etched against the restless light, staring into embers that offer no warmth, no answer. His shoulders, usually so straight, sag under the invisible burden of the walls he must defend. Eleanor pulls back from the spy hole, the cold mortar biting her cheek. The moonlight in the scriptorium feels suddenly hostile, exposing her. The warmth of the stolen bread is a distant memory. Low, in the sealed heart of the castle, a sound threads its way up through the stone. Faint, fragile, almost lost. The newborn's cry, weaker now, tiny, fluttering breath against the crushing weight of the Lord's pronouncement. Against the gathering howl of wolves beyond the walls. Siege. The castle, sealed since dusk, now feels like a trap tightening. Eleanor wraps her arms around herself, shivering not just from cold, but from the vast, chilling shadow of what dawn will bring. Outside the high window, the first few flakes of snow begin to fall, silent and relentless, dusting the dark battlements like ash. The long night had only just begun, and already the world had shrunk to the size of a stone fist, clenched against a coming tide of iron and ice. And in its fragile center, a tiny flame of life guttered, fighting for its next breath. The snow falls, not in gentle flakes now, but in a furious, howling shroud, devouring the world beyond the arrow slits. Dawn never truly came. Only a sickly, gray twilight leaching through the storm, revealing the castle transformed. The silent waiting is over. The storm has broken. Not thunder, but a deeper, more terrible sound shakes the very stones beneath Eleanor's feet. A rhythmic, earth-trembling thum. Thum. The siege engines have begun their grim work. Each impact resonates through the floor of the high scriptorium, a monstrous heartbeat shaking dust from the ancient timbers, vibrating in Eleanor's teeth. She clings to the cold sill of the narrow window, peering out into the white maelstrom. Shapes coalesce and vanish in the swirling snow. Endless dark lines of men and horses. The hulking shadows of wheeled towers like moving mountains. The flicker of countless torches, defiant against the blizzard's gloom. The wolf's head. Banners are invisible, swallowed by the storm, but their presence is a cold pressure against the skin. A promise of savagery carried on the wind that shrieks like the damned around the tower. The castle is no longer a waiting tomb. It is a stirred hornet's nest, vibrating with frantic, grim energy. Gone is the heavy silence of the sealed night. Now the air thrums with shouted orders, the clang of hammers on metal, the desperate screech of carts being hauled across frozen cobbles. The inner ward below is a scene of controlled chaos. Beneath arms, faces grim beneath helmets, form ragged, lines, their breath pluming white in the frigid air as sergeants bark drills. The rhythmic thump-thump-thump of pike butts striking the frozen earth echoes the pounding of the distant engines. Boys scarcely older than Eleanor struggle under the weight of bundles of arrows, their faces pinched with cold and fear. Blacksmiths, stripped to the waist despite the cold, sweat gleaming on soot-streaked skin as they beat red-hot metal at frantic forges set up against the inner curtain wall, repairing armor, forging arrowheads, the sharp clang a counterpoint to the sieges. Deep drumbeat. The smell is overwhelming, wood smoke from 100 braziers. The acrid temps of hot metal and scorched hoof, the underlying stench of fierce sweat. In the ever-present, bone-deep cold that no fire seems able to touch, Eleanor tears herself from the window. The scriptorium's vantage point feels suddenly exposed, vulnerable. She descends, not into the maelstrom of the ward, but through the castle's hidden veins, the trembling servants' passages. The vibrations are stronger here, transmitted through the stone. A constant reminder of the monstrous fists pounding the outer walls. She passes pantries being stripped bare, sacks of grain hauled towards the granary tower, faces etched with a new kind of hunger, the hunger of impending scarcity. Scullion, eyes wide with terror, drops a stack of wooden trenchers with a clatter that seems deafening against the background roar. No one scolds him. Fear is the master here now. She finds Agnes not in the chapel, but in the cramped infirmary off the garrison hall. It is already filling. A man groans on a pallet, his leg bent at a sickening angle, fallen from the wall walk during the frantic preparations. Agnes moves with a fierce, brittle energy, her face set in stone. Steam in a pot over a small brazier, adding a sharp, medicinal scent to the sweat and blood. She binds a gash on the squire's arm, her hands swift and sure, but Eleanor sees the tremor in them. The shadow Agnes prayed against is no longer abstract. It is the shadow of the siege tower looming through the snow, the shadow of the mangonel's arm, the shadow of starvation stalking the corridors. "Hold this," Agnes snaps, thrusting a bowl of steaming water towards Eleanor without looking. Her voice is stripped of its usual warmth, honed to a sharp edge by necessity. "Yes, the cloth. Hard. Stop the bleeding." There is no room for childhood here, only the raw mechanics of survival. Eleanor obeys, the heat of the water biting her cold hands, the coppery smell of blood thick in her nostrils. The man's groans mingle with the relentless doom from outside. The castle's stones groan in reply. A sudden, sharper sound cuts through the din, not an impact, but a splintering crack, followed by a roar that shakes dust from the rafters. It comes from the direction of the east curtain wall. Agnes freezes, her head snapping up, her eyes meeting Eleanor's. In them, Eleanor sees not fear, but a terrifying clarity. The sound speaks of wood, yielding, stone, fracturing, breach, or the beginning of one. Agnes drops the bandage she was preparing. "Stay clean. Bind," she orders Eleanor, her voice low and urgent. Then she is gone, snatching her satchel, pushing past the incoming wounded, vanishing into the chaotic corridor towards the sound of crisis. Eleanor stands, the bloody cloth forgotten. In the bowl, the heat leaching away. The infirmary seems to hold its breath, the groans momentarily silenced by that terrible sound. The siege engine's thum pauses, replaced by a rising literal cheer from beyond the walls. A sound like wolves baying, chilling the blood far more than the blizzard's wind, driven by a terror deeper than any garderobe darkness. Eleanor flees the infirmary, not downwards, but upwards again, towards the one place offering a view of the unfolding horror, the narrow partisan platform clinging to the south tower, overlooking the eastern approach. The wind here is a physical assault, screaming, tearing at her clothes, laden with stinging snow. She squints, shielding her eyes, low, through the swirling, white, chaos reigns. Torches bob like frantic fireflies near the base of the east wall. Men swarm like ants on the battlements, candor visible even through the storm. A dark, ragged wound in the stonework near the gatehouse. Not a full breach, not yet, but a deep gash, stones dislodged, the wooden hoarding above it splintered and sagging. Its figures scrambled to shore it up with timber, hurling rocks down onto the attackers swarming below, barely visible in the gloom. Arrows fly in both directions, dark streaks against the snow. Agnes is there, a small, determined figure amidst the armored men, not fighting, but dragging a wounded soldier back from the crumbling edge, her strength astonishing against the storm and the violence. A tiny spark of courage in the howling. Dark, a boulder arcs out of the blinding snow, launched from the unseen mangonel. It misses the breach, crashing into the wall nearby with a shower of stone fragments. The impact shudders through the bartizan. Eleanor stumbles back, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Below, the desperate struggle continues. The cheer of the attackers has subsided, replaced by the furious clang of steel on steel as the defenders repel climbers. At the wall's base, it is a scene from a fevered nightmare. Swirling snow, firelight glinting on steel, the desperate cries of men, the relentless groan of straining wood and stone. The castle bleeds its first stone blood. Eleanor retreats from the platform's edge, the cold finally penetrating her terror-numbed skin. She doesn't descend into the chaos below. Instead, drawn by a need deeper than fear, she slips back into the trembling quiet of the scriptorium. The view here is wider, showing the vast, encircling host swallowed by the blizzard, the relentless machines like dark beasts in the snow. But Eleanor doesn't look at them. Her gaze is drawn downwards into the inner ward. Amidst the frantic preparations, near the chapel door, a small figure kneels. It's the young scullion who dropped the trenchers, haste fumbling with flint and steel, his small hands shaking. Before him, placed carefully on a flat stone, stands a single, short, stubby candle, salvaged wax, perhaps, or stolen tallow. He strikes the flint. Sparks fly, dying in the wind. He tries again, and again. A tiny, defiant act against the overwhelming dark. Finally, a spark catches the charred linen. A fragile, golden flame flickers, then steadies, pushing back the gray twilight just a little. Eleanor watches the tiny flame. It wavers, but holds. It speaks of Agnes pulling a wounded man from the breach, speaks of the scullion's stubborn spark in the snow, speaks of the newborn's weak cry, still fighting for breath somewhere deep in the stone heart, speaks of defiance. The siege engines pound, the snow howls, the walls tremble, but the flame burns, small, vulnerable, unbroken. Hope, in the end, isn't a shout. It's a whisper. It's a stolen breath. It's a single candle lit against the swallowing dark. The walls shook. The fire spread. The fate of this castle and everyone within it hung by a thread thinner than candlelight. What happened next? How did courage face the wolf's jaws? Subscribe now to witness the epic conclusion, the sacrifice, the cunning, the final, desperate stand. Like this chapter, if Eleanor's fragile hope resonated with you, share this story of resilience against the darkness. The siege has only just begun.